You're listening to Let's Talk Creation with Todd Wood and Paul Garner, the creation show where we learn, grow, and worship.
Well, welcome to another episode of Let's Talk Creation with Paul Garner and Todd Wood. I'm Paul Garner.
And I'm Todd Wood.
You are very welcome, whether you're a new listener or one of our regulars. It's great to have you here today. Do remember to subscribe if you haven't already. Hit that subscribe button, hit the notification bell. And why not share the joy with all of your friends and family and tell them about the podcast. Our listeners are our best ambassadors, so do tell others about the podcast. That would be great. Todd, today we've got another episode in one of our occasional series, the series that we're doing about natural evil.
Mm-hmm.
We've got a number of series running, and this is one of them.
Yes.
And we're spinning lots of plates. Spinning lots of plates. But this series has been fascinating. So we've already looked at a number of different aspects of this question of natural evil. We've looked at the philosophical problem of evil. So kind of if God is all good and if God is all powerful, why is there any kind of evil in the world at all? So we've sort of looked at that to kind of set the scene. We've looked at specifically natural evil, and we've looked at some examples of the kinds of challenging things that as creationists we need to be able to explain. So we've had some fun episodes looking at things like harmful bacteria that cause disease. We've looked at venomous snakes, rattlesnakes, and that kind of thing. We even had an episode where we looked at biological defenses like the human immune system and what function that may have been playing in the world before the curse, before the fall. So this time, though, I think we're going to do something a bit different. So we're hopefully in this episode going to take a broader biblical perspective. And in particular, we want to look at the theme of blessings and curses in the Bible, and what blessings and curses means for how we understand the history of our world.
And this is kind of long overdue, I would say.
Yeah.
Seeing as how this is supposed to be about, natural evil related to the curse in Genesis, and we've never really talked about the curse in Genesis.
Yeah, absolutely.
So it's about time.
As you say, it's about time. It is about time. And to help us today, we've got a returning guest. Our special guest today is Nate Labadorf. Nate was with us, you may remember, when we did our episode on the Samaritan Pentateuch. That was in another series that we're doing, all about biblical chronology. But today he's back to talk to us about blessings and curses. So Nate, welcome to the show. It's good to have you back.
Well, it's great to be here, Paul. I really appreciate it. You and thank you for having me, Todd, as well. Always a pleasure to be here and to talk theology and nerdy stuff about the Bible and get in, real deep. This is my passion, so I appreciate being here.
That's great. That's great. Now, Nate, you've been on before, as I say, but just remind our listeners who you are. Tell our listeners a bit about yourself.
Yeah. So I'm Nate Labadorf, and I have an MA in Biblical Studies and an MDiv. From Bob Jones University. I serve here in Greenville, South Carolina. This is where I grew up, and I serve in churches, and I help do research for my pastor and, dig into all sorts of stuff. So that's where I'm at, where I'm working. My money earning job, I guess I'm an estimator for an electrical company down here. So if you hear any noises or something in the office, that's probably what's going on. There's somebody walking by.
Okay. That's great. Yeah. So, Nate, today we're going to be talking about this theme of blessings and curses. Why don't we start right at the beginning? Start with some basics. So, in the context of the Hebrew Bible, what do we mean by blessings and curses?
Yeah. So, when we talk about blessings and curses in Scripture, there's lots of different ways the words are used, but when we're talking like a formal blessing or a formal curse, like it says, and God blessed them and said, something. It's something more like today we might view a blessing as, something nice somebody might say to somebody else. Same with the curse. It's just some mean words. But that's kind of as far as they go. In biblical times, Hebrew Bible and throughout the ancient Near East, blessings and curses were a lot more effectual. Like when you said them, something happened. And so a blessing, of course, is the positive side of that. You pronounce a blessing on somebody, and um, again, in the ancient culture, the gods or whoever you invoked you would go and do the blessing on that person or nation. Same with the curse. If you curse somebody, whoever you invoked on your, whatever you were thinking supernaturally, that's what you were intending. You're intending that God to go out and beat up your enemies or whatever it was. In the context of the Hebrew Bible, of course, we're talking about Yahweh God. And when the priests would give the Aaronic blessing, it wasn't just nice words that he would say at the end of a sacrificial day or end of a feast, God bless you and keep you. It's not just nice things. Like when he said it, it was supposed to be effectual. It was supposed to be binding, if you would, on God to actually go out and keep and protect the nation of Israel. And, as humans, we have a limited perspective. And sometimes when those blessings were given, maybe didn't feel like it comes through, but when God gives a blessing or a curse, he doesn't have a limited perspective. And so when he does it, it will come about. It changes in the moment, it changes the course of the future, if you would. So yeah, that's kind of the basics of blessings and curses. Of course, blessings the positive side, curses the negative side, but when it's spoken, it was viewed to be actually effectual and moving in the earth.
Yeah. And I think that's different to our culture, where maybe we've almost demeaned those words. We've devalued those terms because the way that we we use the word blessing. I mean, we say bless you when someone sneezes and that kind of thing. So but in the biblical context, this is something really substantial. This is something where you expected something to happen, as you say.
Yeah, there's this random story in the book of Judges, I forget the exact text, where this mother finds out her gold is missing and she pronounces a curse on whoever stole her gold. Then she finds out, oh, it's her son who stole the gold. And then she pronounces a blessing upon him to undo the curse that she just pronounced on her own son. So it was viewed as a very effectual thing. Like this was going to happen. So it's very, very powerful if you sense in those terms.
Yeah, that's kind of like how it is. That's kind of like how it is here in the South when we say "bless his heart" as a prelude to "I'm going to insult you now."
Yeah, right. Yeah,
bless his heart. He's dumb as a stump.
Yeah, right. Or
and it's,
yeah. Go ahead.
I was going to say it's probably quite it's our materialistic mindset, I think, at work, isn't it? Because it's actually quite a modern thing. I think even in the fairly recent past, people would have taken blessings and cursings much more seriously than we do perhaps in our sort of very Western materialistic sort of culture.
Yeah, very true. You think of all the good luck charms and all this stuff to protect you from curses or whatever. In every culture, they're there. So yeah, people take it seriously, and it's. I think in some way we can do more in our church today, but especially with our benedictions and stuff. But that's another.
Yeah. I suppose one of the passages that people think of when this question of blessings and curses is raised is Deuteronomy chapter 28.
Yeah,
we 28. Think of those blessings and curses there. So just tell us a bit about that, because that gives us a good biblical example of what we're talking about, I think.
Yeah, so Deuteronomy 28, of course, you have the people standing on the mountains, and they're the Deuteronomy, the second giving of the law. The covenant's being set again. They're about to go into the land. Moses, of course, is giving his last great sermon, if you would. And it's a re-giving of the covenant, that their agreement, if you would, with God, their binding contract with God that God gave to them. And part of covenants was this aspect of blessings and cursings. And we see this not just in Deuteronomy 28. We see this other places, Hittite covenants, for example. But in Deuteronomy 28, you have this these blessings. So if you obey the laws of this covenant, if you, follow me, you don't pursue other gods, this kind of thing, then I'll bless you and all these great things will happen. But if you disobey and you stray, you serve other gods, then I'll curse you and, cursed be, and it goes on for that. And so when they pronounced these things, it was, uh, a binding agreement like this, you know, this will really happen and justice will be met if we do not meet uh, the, if we do not meet our obligations in the covenant. And so, Deuteronomy 28 is definitely an excellent example of one of these blessings and curses passages. And it's it's a contingent blessing and curses. Some blessings are just absolute. We'll get to Genesis 128, and that's just an absolute blessing where it will happen. Some, but some are contingent based off of, in Deuteronomy 28, the actions of the people and what they were doing. So,
I think that's a good example because it kind of has this, it conveys this idea that this is a solemn contract, and that there are serious consequences in terms of these blessings and curses. So sort of moving on, how do blessings and curses provide a kind of framework, do you think, for understanding God's dealings with humanity throughout the Bible? And specifically, I suppose, as we think about creation, as we think about Genesis, how does it relate to the role of humanity in creation?
Yeah, and I think this is an important part to grasp. So we have this foundation of when God gives a blessing, this is what happens. And in Genesis 1:28, we read it and it, God blessed them and said unto them, be fruitful and multiply, fill the earth and subdue it. And a lot of times, I know in a modern context, you've probably heard it. It's called the creation mandate. It says, be fruitful, right? It's a command. It's in the imperative mood, but it's not quite right as far as an interpretation. Maybe super popular, but not necessarily right. Because we know it's not just a command, because it doesn't say God commanded them and said to them. It says God blessed them and said to them. And so he sets the genre of that particular passage with that, the little prefix there, God blessed them and said unto them. And so when he does this, he's not giving humanity a command that we must fulfill. He's giving humanity, he's putting in something, he's instilling into humanity something they cannot help but do. And so when God created the earth, he created all this stuff. You can think of it this way, like, you can think of, maybe the direction of the universe was open. I'm not an open theist. Don't take it that way, but conceptually, like, it could have gone in any direction. And then when God gave this blessing, he set the course for the future. This is what will happen. And of course, God and his providence and everything on top of that. But when God gave this blessing, this is something that humans can't help but do now.
Right.
And so he gives it there. And so, you get to be able to have dominion, exercise dominion over the earth. You have to have multiplication because two people can't possibly fill up the whole earth. Maybe in America, we might come close, but back then when we ate healthy food, probably not. So, it all wraps together, have dominion and multiplication over the earth.
Yeah. Yeah. And that creation blessing is continuous. So it remains active even after the fall. It's not something that's kind of abnegated because of the fall, and
right.
Although in some kind of corrupted form, we don't perfectly fulfill this.
Well, yeah, absolutely. I mean, you just see it all around us. I mean, people, like, what are we at? 8 billion people today? I forget the exact number.
Something like that.
Something close to 7-8 billion, right? I mean, we're filling the earth, we're multiplying it, and you're not going to stop it. And are we subduing the earth? Are we having dominion over the earth? Yes, we're feeling it, and we're having dominion. Now, as we'll get to in a bit, we have the fall and corruption, of course,
Yeah.
which we don't multiply as God intended.
Yeah.
We exercise dominion. We more dominate the earth, destroying natural resources. We're not stewarding them like we should. We're exploiting the universe. So even though it's still broken, even though we're broken, the creation blessing is still in effect even today. You just look at the world around you. We are doing this, uh, not in the right way, but we are doing it.
Yeah. Yeah. Let's talk about the image of God here, if we may. So, how does this relate to the position, the role that God has given us to exercise this dominion over creation and through being fruitful and multiplying? How does that relate to it?
So, the image of God is Genesis chapter 1 really sets humanity as the capstone of creation and is geared towards showing how, at least in my understanding of it, is showing how humanity really is supposed to rule and have dominion over the earth. And so you have this blessing that's set, right? And this is something that now will happen. You have the image of God, which is part of this. So in biblical times, having the uh, kings were thought of as, the images of God, the representations of God on earth, and they're supposed to rule in a way that reflected their God. We know, because of Genesis chapter 1, that all humanity is given this image of God, and we are supposed to rule, exercise dominion in a way that reflects the goodness and the care and the compassion of our great God. And so the image of God. Now, a lot of people, if you look back through church history, there's kind of two fundamental ways you can interpret this idea of image. One is, I call it the attributive, the attributes. Like the image of God is just a list of attributes that you have.
Right.
The ability to have a relationship with God, a higher intelligence, morality. These kind of ideas that are kind of lumped into the image of God. More recently, people have pointed to the ancient Near East and other contexts where the image of God, it's more of a function, the functionality. So you have the attributive, and then you have a function where it's a position that God has given humanity. So they are in the position of God imagers. We are we have that authority. And so I don't think it's one or the other, because if you have the position, you also have to have certain attributes. If you're going to rule for God, you have to be able to have a relationship with God. If you're going to be able to work out what's just on the earth, you have to have a moral sense, So it's not one or the other. It is both. But it does all point to this idea that we are representations of God. God delegated his authority. He didn't have to. He's not bound to do this, but he gave his authority to us. He blessed it upon us so that we would go out and rule the earth in his name. Again, all underneath him. And the way we see it today is not not anywhere close to where it should be. But that's the idea of the image of God. And then what else is important here is you have the blessing, you have the image of God, which is all wrapped up here in Genesis chapter 1. And then in Genesis chapter 2, we see Eden, which is kind of this third part of what it means to have dominion over the earth. So Eden, of course, is described as a garden, and I no doubt it was absolutely gorgeous and beautiful. And whatever your definition of a garden is, that's probably what it was. It was awesome. But it was not just it wasn't just your grandmother's rose garden or whatever it was. It really served, and as you go through scripture, it serves as the meeting place between the material world and the supernatural world. So it's the meeting place between heaven and earth.
Hmm.
And we see this, it's a mountain, a cosmic mountain. We see, especially in the book of Ezekiel 28. If you kind of trace through, it's this idea of a mountain that shows up, and where the angels and supernatural beings would congregate, and humanity is placed in this. So it's like, it'd be similar to, if you're going to be in the center place of authority of power, like in America, Washington, D.C., it'd be like placing me moving to Washington, D.C., because I've been tasked with a certain task, and I need to be close to whoever's in charge. And London, over across the pond there, it'd be similar to that. So man, he's not just tossed out into the earth somewhere. He's placed in the garden. He's placed with God. He walks with God daily, apparently. How cool is that? And and so even that aspect of the garden is not just a really nice home for humanity. It seems to be a place where the rulership of God was exercised upon the earth.
Yeah.
So all that kind of fits together into one big picture of dominion.
Yeah. There's been a lot of discussion in theological circles about Eden as a kind of temple.
Yeah.
Does that kind of fit with the picture that you're painting there of this special sacred place where God is present with man? Yeah.
Yeah. So you can, we see the temple is designed to mimic a garden. You see all the pomegranates and all this imagery inside the temple. And of course, the temple it's not like the Old Testament church building. It was the place where God ruled. It's where God sat. The cloud came into the temple and filled it. This was his presence. That was the Holy of Holies was his throne. Like this is where God ruled. And because of sin, of course, we have all the barriers, right? And all the different layers of access, limiting ourselves to the Holy of Holies. But yeah, it was still viewed as a place where heaven and earth met, and where God came down and ruled.
Yeah, yeah. So, Todd, have you got any questions at this point before we kind of summarize what we've said so far?
I'm enjoying it. I mean, I think there's a lot to be said about the blessings. It's really easy to look at our creation now and disease and suffering and to think about the curse, but the curse really only makes sense, I think, in light of the blessing. What is the blessing of creation, and what was it supposed to be, and how then has our behavior changed that blessing? But I'm getting ahead of the story here, so
we are. We're going to come on to the curse. We're going to come on to the curse.
Can I make one more little fun comment there about the Garden of Eden? One of the ways we kind of know is it is on top of a mountain. There in Genesis chapter 2, it talks about a spring coming up out of the middle of the garden, and this river flowing out, and then it splits into 4 rivers. And rivers only go downhill, last I checked. Maybe they went uphill before the flood or something. I don't know. But if we still have basically the same natural laws post-flood as we do before flood, this river came out, went downhill, and then it went around like 4 different nations. So it had to be up pretty high for it to actually be able to do that. So that's just a little interesting exegetical note in that text there.
Yeah, that's a very interesting point. So just sum up then, Nate, if you will, what we've kind of said so far about blessings, before we sort of move on to the curse.
Yeah, so in the Hebrew Bible, blessings and curses are not just merely rhetorical devices, but they're almost tangible expressions of divine authority. And the blessings and curses shaped human history, the governance, and their destiny ultimately. So the creation blessing in Genesis 1:28 establishes human dominion and multiplication as a foundational reality over the earth. And it's not just merely a command. And it's ensuring that God's purposes for the world would unfold despite the corruption that came later via sin.
Yeah.
So the concept of the image of God it's given to all humanity. It democratizes this view of authority where we're all made in God's image, emphasizing that all humans, not just kings uh, or priests, that we are all divine representatives entrusted with stewardship. So we're all equally part of this system.
Mhm.
And then, of course, Eden. It's not just again. It's not just your grandmother's rose garden or whatever. It's Eden is the sacred meeting place between God and humanity, and
Mhm.
it highlights the intended harmony that was there in the garden between the divine order and human governments, and we weren't supposed to be separate. It wasn't supposed to be a different thing.
Yeah.
And so ultimately, this framework of blessings and curses underscores a biblical worldview in which the world was designed for human rule under God's authority.
Yeah. I think this is very helpful because, as Todd has always said, we can't really understand the curse without this sort of framework of blessing that precedes it. So that's very helpful. So why don't we move on then from the blessings in Genesis 1 to the curse in Genesis 3? And perhaps we can sort of begin by thinking about some of the specifics of the curse in Genesis 3 and how those different aspects of the curse, which are sort of spelled out in that chapter, relate to the creation blessing. Could you kind of walk us through that?
Yeah. So of course we have the fall, and we're not covering the fall, but you have the fall, and we have all the scapegoating that goes on, and Adam blames
Yeah.
his wife, and Eve says, "No, the serpent deceived me." And so you have God coming in and stepping in, and I forgot to actually pull up the text here, but so God, of course, steps in and he curses. He pronounces this curse, and he directly curses the serpent. On your belly you shall go.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and and you are cursed more than every other creature. And then he
Yeah.
turns to the humans involved.
Mm.
And so what he does, and I think this is important to realize, a lot of curses are punitive or aggressive. Okay, so a witch putting a curse or a hex on somebody, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's a negative thing. It's supposed to punish. It's supposed to destroy. It's supposed to give vengeance.
Yeah.
That's not what is going on in
Mm.
Genesis chapter 3.
Mm.
It seems that God is giving a curse to limit the blessing that he gave in Genesis chapter 1.
Right.
Because now man is sinful. Now man is going to act corruptly, and we'll see that as just sin keeps on abounding. Um, Man will be corrupt. So he introduces the curse to limit the the boundless blessing of
Mm.
Genesis chapter 1. So we
Mm.
see, okay, he's told them to be fruitful and multiply. So into that he introduces pain and childbirth, and multiplying is now burdened with pain and suffering. And so fertility, which once was a pure gift, it becomes accompanied by suffering.
Mm.
We see, okay, he gives dominion, and he gives us the blessing of dominion, right?
Mm.
Well, people unified together, like in the Tower of Babel. God says they'll be able to do anything they want, right? And that's not a good thing when you got sinners involved.
Mm.
And so into dominion, he introduces this strife.
Mm.
So humans, they're meant to be harmonious and get along and work together and all those things that we want. But sin introduced this, uh, you know, darkness into humanity. And so he put strife between the man and the woman. That's my interpretation of Genesis 3:16 there, where your desire will be for your husband, but he'll rule over you. And if you trace
Mm.
those verbs out, it seems to be more of this aggressive, tension-based relationship.
Mm.
And it, so into the only two humans at that time, but throughout humanity, he's put this jealousy and this strife to limit our dominion on earth.
Mm.
And then also you also have strife between um, humanity and the cosmic order, if you would. The supernatural beings. However you interpret the snake, it is a supernatural being. It is Satan. And so he's putting this enmity between the woman, the seed of the woman, and the seed of the serpent. And so there's this conflict, and so into dominion. Everybody, we were supposed to have dominion alongside of the angels. I don't know how that works. You start getting into mysticism and start losing data very quickly when we talk about the supernatural world. Yeah. But however it was supposed to work somehow. And so God introduced conflict between humans, and he also introduces conflict between humanity and at least the seed of the serpent, the dark part of the supernatural world. And then, Genesis 1:29 talks about how God gave them all the fruits of the trees, and you can eat all this stuff, and the world was just going to produce for them. But here, Genesis 3:17 through 19, we see how the earth is cursed, and to resist human efforts with sweat and toil and thorns and thistles are all coming up, and to slow down our cultivation of the world, and the provision that God gave us. Well, there's a cap on that, if you would. There's a limitation to that. And so again, backing up a little bit, we have this curse. Well, we had the blessing, and it was effectual. It happened. Like God pronounced it, and this is the course of, this is how things were going to happen. Sin entered. We have corrupted humans, and if they were allowed to continue in that blessing, it would have. It still took a while for humanity to get bad. Genesis chapter 6, right? But it would have gotten bad a lot quicker. So God introduced this curse to limit the spread of corruption. And just again, it is a punishment. I'm not saying it's not punishment, but it's there's a compassion involved. It's not that God is just out here ready just to zap them with a lightning bolt. He's limiting his goal, at least in my understanding of the text, is to limit the spread of corruption on earth. And even in the curse, we forget that this verse is in the curse itself. Genesis 3:15, where God promises the seed that will crush the serpent's head. So even in the curse, there's hope. Even in this horrible moment of you can say the greatest, the worst moment of human history, God still shines his hope. He still shines his light that, it's humans now corrupt, but you know what? I'm going to provide a way. I'm going to save you. And that's what's so amazing. Like even in this cosmic curse that has made it hard for all of us to wake up in the morning and go to work and whatever else, God introduces hope. And that's to me, like, yes, the curse and introduces thorns and thistles, and it is natural evil, if you would. It is it's not good in that sense, but it's a response to sin, number one. So even there, you push it back one more step. Actually, it's still a response to sin. So sin is still the origin of all natural evil. But even in all that, God is still loving. He's still compassionate. He still cares about us for whatever reason. But so that's what's just important to realize is, there's one curse in Genesis, or at least one big one, but there's so many blessings all the way through the book of Genesis, over and over and over again. And so it's just important to keep it balanced, and all of our darkness and all of our struggles and are wondering why does God allow these things to happen? God is working. God is blessing. God is doing stuff. Anyways, sorry. I entered preacher mode there for a second.
No, no, that's very good. I find this, yes, the curse is punishment, as you say. but it's also interesting that we can see in it this evidence of divine restraint on human corruption and wickedness. And I think that's very helpful. People often sort of imagine what would have happened if you had somebody like Hitler or a Mao or a Stalin, and they could live forever. Their wickedness would just be completely unrestrained. And it's like the Tower of Babel, isn't it? Nothing will be, beyond them. Yeah. And so we can see even in the curse evidence of God's grace and mercy towards us in sort of limiting the potential for evil.
Right. Right.
So that, I think that's very helpful. So in what ways?
Can I jump in?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Sure.
I just want to emphasize this for our listeners, because I think this may be something that we sort of, as a creationist growing up here in the shadow of Genesis flood, right?
Right.
We tend to think of the Genesis, the primordial history there, Genesis 1 through 11. We tend to think of it in very mechanical terms, I guess, where we're looking at, let's list out all the words here that refer to the global flood and how we can show that the flood is global. And it's all very mechanical and sort of sucked the life out of it, really. And I think it's super exciting and important to realize that when God set out to pronounce the curse, this is not just a random punishment, right? It's not like a parent who has been taken by surprise by some child's real bad disobedience. You walk into the bedroom and they have painted their walls with paint, and you're like, what have you done? And you kind of try to figure out the appropriate punishment for that. There's a clear relationship between what God set for human beings to do and now what he's doing to curse them with the same sorts of blessing. I really started thinking about this because of multiplying.
Yeah.
Right.
Because when in Genesis 1, it says, God blessed them and said to them, be fruitful and multiply. And then in Genesis 3, when he's talking to Eve, he says, I will greatly multiply your sorrow in childbirth. It's exactly the same Hebrew word, multiply. He could have said any number of things to talk about how, well, now, having babies is going to really hurt. But no, they record it as multiplying, which then struck me as, well, that's an interesting correlation. And the more I began thinking about it, the more I realized it's not random. This curse is not random. This did not take God by surprise. He had this plan in mind already.
Yeah. He's not one of these Greek gods you picture, laying back on the couch and all of a sudden humanity just is acting up. So zap him with a bolt of lightning or something. Or like, what I forget, was it Numa Elish or something? Why did he send a flood? Or why did the gods send a flood?
Yes, because
humans are really annoying and loud and we don't get any sleep. But here it's a very, we're just putting human terms to God. It's a very well thought out curse and statement, if you would. It's marvelous. It's unfortunate that it had to happen, but at the same time, and again, hope. Like there's even in this dark moment, there's hope.
Yeah. God is not capricious.
No.
So just kind of talk to us about how we see the effects of that curse then kind of playing out through the rest of Scripture before we come on to maybe, what God has done to solve the problem, as it were.
Right. So, there's always a debate about, death entering the world and, how much does the sin actually affect the natural order? And you've got all sorts of different camps, and of course we'd say, well, the sin brought the death to not just humanity but to all human beings, not just spiritual death, but to not just spiritual death, but physical death as well, dying, or, you shall surely die, is what the text says. And so you have as the spread of corruption happens, like, we believe that the world was put under bondage in the curse. Something changed when God, like I said, a curse is, especially when God, the uncreated God, speaks this curse to creation. Stuff changes. We're not, we may not be able to parse it out with a scientific, study or whatever, but it changed because he's God and he created with a word, and he introduced these things. Thorns and thistles come to mind. And so you have the blessing, the curse, and then the subjugation of the earth to these things. And we see in Romans chapter 8, 19 through 23 talks about, for the creation was subjected to futility, not willingly. So creation didn't choose this, but because of him who subjected it, in hope that creation itself will be set free from its bondage to corruption and obtain the freedom of the glory of the children of God. And so we see that, creation is subjected to futility. It also talks about how creation is groaning in that passage, anticipating, I believe, the liberation from the curse. And so this indicates that it's groaning, it's futile, it's passing away. It's brings to mind almost this lament. There's one study out there, and I don't have her name off the top of my head, who traced this idea of futility and some of these words in this section of, and it's really has this picture of just this lament and this crying, like just how awful it is. And of course, the world is falling apart. Not just us humans, just extinctions and uh, natural disasters and things like that. And so I believe Paul is looking back at Genesis 3:17, Romans. He cites the book of Genesis a lot. So why wouldn't he be thinking about it in this text and showing how the creation itself groans and is subject to corruption because of this event? And also that correlates with other passages of scripture. We have where sin brings corruption and brings disaster. And it's not just your sin. It's not just this, random link. It's like, no, sin brought ecological disaster, not just national disaster. So Hosea 4 verses 1-3 talks about how the curse extends to the land, and where even the fish of the sea and the birds of the heaven are taken away. Why? Because there's no faithfulness or steadfast love, no knowledge of God in the land. Why is God sending judgment? Why are the birds disappearing? Why don't we have Carolina parakeets anymore? Or whatever it is. Well, God is. It's because of sin. We see Jeremiah chapter 12, verse 4. How long will the land mourn and the grass of every field wither? For the wickedness of the people that live in it, the animals and the birds are swept away, and because the people said, he is blind to our ways. And we see this other places, Isaiah 5:8-10, Deuteronomy 28:23. That's that blessing and curse passage we talked about earlier. And God says, I'm going to make the sky like bronze and the earth like iron. Like, this is, what is that? That's ecology. That's creation itself groaning because of the sinfulness of humanity. Of course, ultimately we see the flood, Genesis 6, 5-7. And this this verse is just always incredible to me. And the Lord saw that the wickedness of the human heart was great in the earth, and every inclination of the thoughts of their hearts was only evil continually. Like, it's like inclination, thoughts, hearts, like 4 levels down. All of that was evil, only evil. Like, they didn't think in terms of good. Like, it just wasn't even a category for them to place things in. And so what happened? Well, the Lord was sorry that he made the earth, or that he made humans on the earth, and it grieved his heart. So the Lord said, I will blot out from the earth the humans I've created, humanity. And again, so the flood is a result of sin. And then ultimately, to the end of time, Isaiah 24 is known as the little apocalypse. And so Isaiah is not just looking into his immediate future with Syria coming in, but he's looking to the end of time. And he says, this is Isaiah 24, the earth mourns and withers, the world languishes and withers. The highest people, the highest people of the earth languish. The earth lies defiled under its inhabitants, for they have transgressed the laws, violated the statutes, broken the everlasting covenant. And so we see here again, just the earth is withering, it's drying up, it's ending. Why? Sin. And so, again, going back to the debate about does Genesis chapter 6, not 6, Genesis chapter 3 and the fall, affect creation? I was like, well, every other time in the scriptures we see these mass extinctions, sin's involved, and it's like,
yeah.
Why would it not?
Why would it be?
Yeah. And then we can ask the converse about this whole thing too. It's like, all right, fine. If sin, okay, we see in scriptures all the time, sin brings ecological, natural disaster all the time. Okay, if you take an evolutionary worldview and you've got millions of years and 5-6 mass extinction events, right? Well, what caused was that just normal? Was that good? And then all of a sudden humans showed up and now it's because of sin? Like, what's the difference here? Like, I know you could probably interpret it in a way that fits that paradigm, but so it's not a slam dunk argument against evolution, but at the same time, it really fits with the biblical data that sin causes natural destruction, natural environmental destruction. Fits with a 6-day creation week much better than an evolutionary multiple mass extinction type of scenario.
And surely Paul has to have in mind in Romans 8, Genesis 3.
What else he refer to?
what else is he referring to when he talks about the groaning as in the pains of childbirth? I mean, what does that make you immediately think of? But Genesis chapter 3 and the curse. So I think that's got to be the context, isn't it?
My mind, yeah.
Yeah. So we need to come on to the good news.
Good news, always the best.
Yeah. So earlier you made this interesting point that despite the curse, we even there at the time of God pronouncing the curse, there is this note of hope.
Right.
That there is this hope of a coming seed, the seed of the woman, who would crush the serpent's head.
Right.
So unpack for us then how we see that promise of redemption kind of being fulfilled in human history. And maybe we can begin with staying in Genesis with the Abrahamic covenant. How does it relate to Abraham?
Yeah. So we, of course, we're skipping over the Noahic blessing. There's a covenant and a blessing in that text. But the big one is, of course, most of the book of Genesis is focused on Abraham and his descendants, and this Abrahamic covenant, this Abrahamic blessing that God gives. And he uses that term blessing again. And he says, I will make of you a great nation and I will bless you. This is, Genesis chapter 12. And so he's through the and this is amazing. Like through the Abrahamic covenant, this is God's plan to undo the curse, undo the fall, and bring back the ultimate fulfillment, the ultimate manifestation of the creation blessing that what we were supposed to have. And so in Genesis 12, he restores, he gives this blessing to him that restores multiplication, and your descendants will be as the stars or in the sky or the sand on the seashore. Like he's building it, dominion. Abraham is promised the land, and in Romans chapter 4 it says the seed of Abraham will inherit the world eventually. You have the blessing to the nations. It's not just the physical descendants of Abraham. It's the reversal of the corruption and the curse. It says, through you, all nations will be blessed. And so while the curse of Genesis chapter 3 brings this suffering and decay, the promise to Abraham really sets the groundwork for this eventual restoration of humanity, for the freedom of the sons of light, what God has promised to redeem. And so, and we see this all the way through. You can trace the Abrahamic, the Abrahamic blessing through Scripture, and especially Paul, Galatians chapter 3 discusses it. And we know now that, of course, anybody by faith, we are the sons of Abraham. By faith, we inherit this blessing. And who is the ultimate seed of that? Well, the ultimate seed of the woman, we know, of course, is Christ. And if you've grown up in church, which probably most of your audience has, you know that Christ is the ultimate fulfillment of Genesis 3:15. And that's why we have the fancy Latin for the proto-evangelicum, right? Or Greek, or I don't know, one of those dead languages that I learned long time ago. Anyways, the proto-evangelical, where it's the first gospel, the first time the gospel is given. Of course, the gospel of who? The gospel of Jesus Christ. And so, what do we see? Once you start looking for it, especially in Paul, like you'll see that Abraham, the seed of Abraham, blessings, the promises to Abraham, the covenants, it's all the way through Paul, almost every book there in the New Testament. Don't quote me on that one, but it's just all the way through Romans and Galatians, especially, just everywhere. And so he's incessantly talking about this restoration blessing. And so, of course, Christ takes the curse upon himself. Christ redeemed us from the curse of the law by becoming a curse for us, Genesis 3:13-14, so that in Christ Jesus, the blessing of Abraham might come to the Gentiles. So it's not just the physical, the genealogical descendants of Abraham that get this blessing. No. Through Christ, we all can receive it. Of course, that's through faith. And Christ takes all that pain upon himself. He takes all the sin, all that corruption upon him. By his stripes we're healed. He takes our guilt and lays it upon him. We see that in Isaiah 53. And he suffers the just, our just deserts. He suffers our just punishment. He takes that. It wasn't just for him, but he willingly takes that and lays it upon himself and dies for our sin. And God, being separated from God, however that works, we've just 2,000 years of church history. We still don't fully grasp how all this has happened. We've had the brightest people working on this for a very long time, and we still don't understand just how incredible the depths of how incredible Christ taking all of our sin, the separation of God. He's redeemed us from the grave. He's conquered death. And eventually he'll tread underfoot through us. It says in Romans chapter 16, he'll tread underfoot the serpent, right? Again, hearkening back to Genesis chapter 3. It's absolutely incredible. So he restores this image of God. We're corrupted, right? I mean, we still have the image of God. We see that. We see Genesis chapter 9, if I remember, and then we see in the book of James, and there's might be one or two other places. Can't remember off the top of my head. But Christ, who is the perfect image of God, Hebrews chapter 1, he redeems us so that in Romans chapter 8, for those whom he foreknew, he also predestined to be conformed to the image of his son. And so there again, we see pulling this together, the image of God that has been given to us, will be restored, will be made whole again. We can also point to like the outpouring of the Spirit as another recommissioning of humanity to go to all nations, and invite people in. We don't spread Christianity by the sword. We don't spread it through politics. We don't spread it through commercialism. Lord knows we've tried all those ways, and none of them really worked very well.
Yeah.
And would rather forget about them. But how do we spread it? We spread it with the gospel. We invite the nations in. And just as Adam was intended to rule, under God, he wasn't just Adam wasn't made God. Adam was made in the image of God. Um, uh, you know, Christ came down, and now Christ, the second Adam, will rule. And of course, what's marvelous about him, he's not just made in the image of God, he is God himself. And that the hypostatic union, as theology we like to talk about, that the joining together of two natures into one person, I believe is what it is. And that's off the top of my head. It's important to get those things right. But it's two natures, one person in Christ. And he will, of course, be ruler of the earth. He's the ultimate fulfillment, back to the Abrahamic covenant. It's the ultimate fulfillment of that promise on earth. So in Christ, so we fast forward, we see creation, we see corruption and all that. Jump forward a couple thousand years, we see Abraham, we see the blessing poured down on him, and then we have Israel and all that, and then we have Christ, who's the ultimate fulfillment of that. And then he commissions us to invite people to come into the restoration of the creation blessing, come into the church. We're supposed to spread the gospel, spread what Christ is doing. And then, of course, ultimately, there'll be the final revelation, the final restoration, truly, of everything. And that's Hebrews chapter 2. And I think it's an undervalued verse in in a lot of creation studies. And I wish, maybe there's more talk about it than what I've heard. But Hebrews chapter 2 talks about, have you not, and it's citing Psalm 8, which talks about how Psalm 8 talks about how all things are subjected underneath humanity's feet. You've crowned him with glory and honor. What is man that you think of him like we're weak and pathetic, but you've crowned him with glory and honor. You've put all things under subjection to his feet. Hebrews 2 points out, well, it doesn't look like everything's subjected underneath his feet. And that's because dominion hasn't been realized because of sin. However, Hebrews 2:9 declares that Christ, through his incarnation, it was important that he became human. He had to, and this is kind of pushing back against the people say, oh, it's just spiritual death in Genesis chapter 3. No. Christ had to come and die physically to be able to restore humanity. No, it wasn't enough for Christ to spiritually die, whatever that means. No, Christ had to come physically. And we, in Hebrews 2:9, but we do see him who for a little while was made lower than the angels, namely Jesus, crowned with glory and honor because of the suffering of death. And so by taking on human nature, he's able to reverse the curse, and restore humanity's rightful place, I guess you could say, as rulers of the earth. Of course, now we're doing it under him. And there's so much more, and I know
I know we could go on and on.
It's
good news.
Yeah, that's good news. And I'm always struck as I read the Gospels, how many echoes of Genesis there are, pointing us to the fact that Christ is the one who has come to roll back the curse.
Right.
By the sweat of your brow, you shall eat bread, and there in the garden, Christ is sweating, great drops of blood.
Right.
And as the Roman soldiers put that crown of thorns on his head, he bears the curse, thorns and thistles. It shall bring forth for you. And the Gospels are just full of that. The Gospel of John, particularly, there's so much more that we could unpack.
Matthew opens up with that, genealogy. It's a direct relationship back to the Pentateuch. Anyways, that's right. I'm sorry.
Yeah. It's absolutely great, and we could go on for a lot longer. Unfortunately, we've got to start drawing to a close because our time is running away with us. But
yes.
That's been a fantastic overview, and I think it gives us a really good framework for thinking about the curse in a new way, a way that perhaps many of our listeners haven't really thought about it before. This is not just some arbitrary punishment on sin. It's not that God is just capricious and is kind of lashing out at fallen humanity. He is providing a kind of restraint on the blessings, but that then points us forward to the one who comes to reverse the effects of the curse and bring that promised fulfillment, that promised redemption. And I just think that's a fantastic way to put all the pieces of the jigsaw together. So, Todd, any last thoughts before we wrap up here?
Oh no, this is good. The curse is more than just the curse. It's more than just God walking in on the kids and finding them being naughty and having to think of now what am I going to do? This is a much richer perspective. God is not surprised by their sin. God already had the plan ready to go. Basically, sort of a dual plan right at the beginning. There's the blessing, there's the cursing. What do you want? And well, there's lots more that we can talk about this, but you're right. We're kind of out of time.
Yeah, we're out of time. Well, Nate, thank you so much for all of that. That's been fantastic, and we'll definitely pick up on some of these themes again in future episodes. I'm sure. But thank you so much for joining us. It's been
really appreciate it. You guys are always a joy to talk to you. Fun. Again, this is my passion, so I really love talking about it, and any chance I can get, absolutely, I appreciate it. So thank you.
We can tell it's your passion. So that's fantastic. We always like passionate speakers. So passionate. Yes, that's great. Well, that's it anyway. We're out of time, so we're going to have to wind up this episode. But thanks again. As ever, not quite sure what's coming next, but join us in 2 weeks' time. I'm sure it'll be fun, and we'll see you then. We'll see you in a fortnight's time.
See you then.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Let's Talk Creation. For more information, visit us at letstalkcreation.org, where you'll find an archive of past episodes and all our show notes. If you'd like to leave a comment or make a suggestion, you can find us on all the major social media platforms. Let's Talk Creation is brought to you in the U.S. by Core Academy of Science and in the U.K. by Biblical Creation Trust. As a listener-supported ministry, we are grateful for all of your financial support. Find out how you can make a contribution at our website, letstalkcreation.org. Also remember to like, subscribe, and share this episode with your friends. Thanks, and see you next time.